Greetings and salutations. All right. Welcome to part 2. Or, as Dickens denoted it, staves 3, 4, and 5. Yeah. So, while people are rolling in, I got a question that I was thinking about while watching the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction tonight. I'm kind of curious. Please answer in the chat if you have a category for this question. I have a list, short list, medium list, long list of historic people that if you could go back and have like a conversation with this person, or if you could bring this person out of their time and place in history into, say, your living room and remove a language barrier, doesn't even need to be a consideration. Who would that person be? Who would those people be? What would you talk to? What would you talk to them about? What would you ask them about? I was fascinated recently to learn that not everyone has a list like this. I'm fascinated because it's kind of obvious in retrospect that no, of course not everyone thinks about this, considers this, but it must be like being born colorblind, where you just sort of assume until a particular age that everyone sees the way that you do, and then one day you discover that other people see differently than you do. I really want to know if folks would put down in the chat if they have, Ruth Sanchez is first weighing in with Tesla and Mother Teresa. That's interesting. Douglas Adams. Oh, Douglas Adams. Good one. Yeah, Douglas Adams. Douglas Adams is definitely in my... Douglas Adams isn't even in my long list. Douglas Adams would be like in my medium list. Malika says encounters of the fifth kind. So, yeah, I'd say, like, you know, if extending this to knowing if there's sentient alien life out there, yeah, let's just give that an open invitation to anybody that could respond there, because that's definitely. But I mean, historically, authors, thinkers, artists, humans that lived previous to now. Or, you know, even people that do live currently now. Stephen Hawking did this fascinating experiment in 2009. It was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it was kind of a real experiment at the same time. Stephen Hawking threw a party for time travelers. And the Discovery Channel came and filmed this. And what the footage that the Discovery Channel got is literally Stephen Hawking dressed very nicely in his wheelchair in this very fancy room, probably at Cambridge. And there's drinks and flowers and a nicely decorated kind of thing. And it's just Stephen Hawking by himself in this room. No one came, because since the party was thrown for time travelers, he didn't send out invitations until the next day. And he sent them out to anyone his publicists and media people could possibly reach and get a hold of. He wanted these invitations to be remembered in the future. And for any time travelers that would get a hold of these invitations later to come to Stephen Hawking's party, I thought that was hysterical and obviously indicative that Stephen Hawking thought this way. My short list, personally, would probably be going chronologically from longest ago to most recent: Aristotle, Leonardo da Vinci. That one kind of makes me a little emotional. Isaac Newton, but Isaac Newton's on the fence because he was kind of an asshole. So the insights that he had might not be worth putting up with his company, but I'm not, given the circumstances, he would probably be really cool. Moving forward, I see Dari threw in Einstein. Einstein's definitely in there. And Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan would definitely be up there. And I cannot leave out Richard Feynman. Yeah, I think, again, language barrier not being a thing, Richard Feynman would probably be tag teaming with Carl Sagan to explain what's going on to everyone at any given time. Those guys would be like the cultural translators of the party. So Archimedes would be a good one. I see Meg throws in. Tesla. Tesla would be a good one. Tesla would be a very good one. I wonder about Tesla in a social situation, how much he would really have to add to the conversation, not because of any intellectual inequity, to be damn certain. But I'm not really clear that if Tesla would just be a quiet observer of the conversation or if he would actively add. And this is a great. Hypatia. Terry Smith throws in Hypatia. Yeah. She would be a really good one. I'm really curious to see what Hypatia actually would. Hypatia and Aristotle. I would be really curious to see what they looked like. Also, there's this wonderful painting of Hypatia, but it was painted about 1,500 years after her death. So there's a little holding out that it was. Claire Foster said Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu would be a really good one. And it would be interesting just to ask Amelia Earhart, what the hell happened? Well, where'd you go? Christina, your dad would count. That would be fair. Mary Shelley. Diana throws in and Mary Shelley, and Ansel Adams would be a really good one. Vincent Van Gogh. Van Gogh would probably be in a similar category for me as Tesla. Like I don't know that I would trust him to have a lot to add to the conversation, but I love where you're going there. And as a unique and different, innovative thinker, he definitely counts. I am not a huge Doctor Who fanatic, but one of the things that did really, really, really get my attention and make me look at the series and watch several episodes is there's this wonderful episode of Doctor Who. And for those of you that aren't art history fans, Van Gogh, I think he sold 2 paintings in his entire life. He died penniless, and in in really just tragic circumstances, being tragically unappreciated. The world was just not ready for his form of impressionism. It just wasn't yet. He was really appreciated afterwards. And there's this episode of Doctor Who where they're time travelers, right? They go back and they kidnap they kidnap Van Gogh just for a couple of hours, and they take him into something like the present day. And they walk him through a gallery showing at a world famous art museum, and it's a Van Gogh exhibit. And so they get to instill in him, okay, you're crazy, so nobody's going to believe you if you tell anybody about this anyway, and so you are a perfect, okay, safe candidate to temporarily kidnap and time travel with. And they take him and they show him what the world eventually thinks of him and how much the world eventually appreciates his art. And it was just such a moving scene and setup. Oh my God, if all of Doctor Who was as brilliant and emotionally heartstring pulling as that and the Whispering Angels, I would have been, I would watch all of it. Wow. I'm really glad we opened with this little conversation. So, Too Cloudy in the Midwest. Blonde Avenger says maybe we'll see the next conjunction in 500 years. Well, there's going to be another one in 60 years that'll be pretty close. Might not be quite as close as tonight, but so there's some hope. I'm glad that Claire Foster shot a lot of photos of this, and good. Kelsey Blaine Gibson says it was lovely at the beach. I assume that means that you were watching from the beach. That's wonderful. Well. Malika said Aesop. That's a good one. Malika's got a bunch of good ones. Yeah. I saw Kafka just fly by on the chat. Damn, I missed it. I missed who said Kafka. Wow. Yeah, Dari says the Van Gogh episode on Doctor Who made me cry. It was so good. It's really good. Yes, Justin Cook, exactly. Pretty much anyone Bill and Ted brought back from the past. What a brilliant movie, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Just the premise that everybody has a much better idea of what's going on than the two moron protagonists is, it's such a great one. Kelsey Blaine Gibson says Walt Disney. Yeah, of course. Galileo, Darius. Yeah, Galileo would be a really, really, really good one. Okay, so let's go on with this. Let's begin the reading. Thank you very much for indulging me. I would love, Socrates. Socrates would be a really good answer to this question. And for those of you who don't remember, in Bill and Ted, they have to look him up in their time traveling phone book. And they can't quite remember They can't find Socrates, and one of them says to the other, "Oh yeah, it's under Socrates." Oh god. So, and I saw Justin. Justin said Zappa. Yeah, Zappa would be a great one to hang out with. He would not be a good one to hang out and have a drink with, but he would be a really good one to have a conversation with. Although I've got to throw in that that Carl Sagan would have clearly been a great one to smoke a joint with. Carl Sagan wrote one book on biological evolution called The Dragons of Eden. And as I recall, Sagan made at least 4 different references to weed for one reason or another. It was all like in context of what he was writing. And he had a different name, like The Reefer and Da Ganja, spelled D-A''G-A-N-G-A-N-G-A-N-J-A, Da Ganja. So Carl Sagan he died before you could say it out loud in public, but yeah, Sagan was clearly just a total stoner. Dari says that Olive would want to meet the Egyptian mouse. That's really cute. Oh, Svetlana said Freddie Mercury. Yeah, Freddie would have been a really good one. Definitely. Okay, so not to converse with a dead horse, but we shall go on. Yes, thank you again for indulging me, because that is just something I've been suddenly curious about. So, the preface to staves 3, 4, and 5 comes from my mom, Pam. Mom taught literature for a lot of years. For anyone that doesn't know, Mom's note: Dickens called his story A Christmas Carol because he expected the story to be repeated and shared and to bring people together, just as the singing of Christmas carols, the way they spread joy and brought families together each season. And to answer the question that I think I posed during the reading of the first part last week, Dickens calls the chapters staves because stave is another word for staff in music. So the book is a carol, and each chapter is a part of the song. Thank you for that explanation, Mom. A Christmas Carol, Part 2. Stave 3. Awakening in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was again upon the stroke of 1. He felt that he was restored to consciousness in the right nick of time for the especial purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger dispatched to him through Jacob Marley's intervention. But finding that he turned uncomfortably cold when he began to wonder which of his curtains this new specter would draw back, he put them every one aside with his own hands and, lying down again, established a sharp lookout all around the bed, for he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of its appearance and did not wish to be taken by surprise and made nervous. Now, being prepared for almost anything, he was not by any means prepared for nothing, and consequently, when the bell struck 1 and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. But all this time he lay in his bed, the very core and center of a blaze of ruddy light which streamed upon it when the clock proclaimed the hour, and which, being only light, was more alarming than a dozen ghosts, as he was powerless to make out what it meant. At last, however, he began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room, from whence, on further tracing, it seemed to shine. This idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. It was his own room. There was no doubt about that. But it had gone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked like a perfect grove, from every part of which bright light and gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that dull petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time. He was too cheap to put more coal and wood in the fire, Heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, great joints of meat, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense cakes, seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. In easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in a shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and he held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door. Come in and know me better, man. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me." The ghost was clothed in one simple deep green robe bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breast was bare. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath, set here and there with shining icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eye, its open hand, its unconstrained demeanor, its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. "You have never seen the like of me before." "Never," said Scrooge. "Have you never walked forth with any other members of my family?" I don't think I have. I'm afraid I have not. Have you had many brothers, Spirit?" "More than 1,800. A tremendous family to provide for." The ghost of Christmas present rose. "Touch my robe." Scrooge did as he was told and held it fast. All vanished instantly. So did the room, the fire, the ruddy glow, the hour of night, and they stood in the city streets on Christmas morning. The sky was gloomy, and the shortest streets were choked up with a dingy mist, half-thawed, half-frozen, whose heavier particles descended in a shower of soot, all as if the chimneys in Great Britain had by one consent caught fire. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad. The steeples called good people all to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes, with their gayest faces. Scrooge and the ghost went on, invisible, into the suburbs of the town, and straight to Scrooge's clerk's house. Mrs. Cratchit, Bob Cratchit's wife, dressed out but poorly in a twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for sixpence, and she laid the cloth. She was assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughters, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes while getting the corners of his monstrous shirt collar into his mouth. And now, two smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose and known it for their own. Basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, these young Cratchits danced about the table and exalted Master Peter Cratchit to the skies while he blew the fire until the slow potatoes, bubbling up, knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled. Mrs. Cratchit said, "What has ever gotten to your precious father, then? And your brother, Tiny Tim? And Martha wandered late last Christmas Day by half an hour." The young Cratchit girl responded, "Is Martha, mother? Oh, there's such a goose, Martha. Why, bless your heart alive, my dear, how late you are. Well, never mind so long as you are come. Sit down before the fire, my dear, have a warm. Bless you, Martha." Mrs. Cratchit kissed her daughter a dozen times and took off her shawl and bonnet for her with officious zeal. Then the young boy Cratchit announced, "Is father coming? I'd, Martha, I'd." So Martha hid herself, and in came Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter. He's literally wearing a comforter. He's wearing a blanket just to make it to and from work and around the streets. At least 3 feet of comforter, exclusive of the fringe, hanging down before him, in his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas, for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch, and all of his limbs and body were girded in supportive iron. Bob looks around the room and says, "Why, where's our Martha?" "Not coming." "Not coming? No, not coming upon Christmas Day?" Martha didn't like to see him disappointed, even if it were only in joke, so she came out prematurely from behind the closet door and ran into his arms, while the 2 young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off to the wash-house that he might hear the pudding singing in the copper. Mrs. Cratchit inquired, "How did little Tim behave?" "Oh, he's good as gold, and better. Sometimes he gets thoughtful, sitting by himself so much. He thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me, coming home, that he hoped the people saw him in the church because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and the blind men see. He's growing strong and hearty." Tim's crutch was heard upon the floor, but back he came before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool beside the fire. Bob turned up his cuffs and compounded some hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons, stirred it round and put it on the hob to simmer. Master Peter and the 2 ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, and they soon returned in high procession. Such a bustle ensued that you might have thought the goose the rarest of all birds, a feathered phenomenon not surpassed by a black swan. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy, ready beforehand, in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigor. Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner at the table. The two young Cratchits set chairs for everybody and crammed spoons into their mouths, lest they should shriek for goose before their turn came to be helped. At last, the dishes were set on, and grace was said. All this was succeeded by a breathless pause as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it in the roasted bird. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all around the table, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried, "Hurrah!" There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose. Its tenderness and flavor, its size, and its cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, as she surveyed one small bit of a bone upon the dish, that they hadn't ate it all at last. Yet, everyone had had enough. And even the youngest Cratchits, in particular, were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. But now, as the plates were being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room, too nervous to bear witness, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break in turning out. Suppose somebody should have got over the wall of the backyard and stolen it while they were making merry with the goose. All sorts of horrors were supposed. Although a great deal of steam, the pudding was out of the copper. A smell like washing day, that was the cloth. A smell like an eating house and a pastry cook's next door to each other. That was the pudding. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed, but smiling proudly with the pudding. It looked like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in a bit of ignited brandy and adorned with Christmas holly stuck into the top. Bob Cratchit reviewed, "Oh, a wonderful pudding." Bob Cratchit said that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that, now that the weight was off her mind, she would confess she had her doubts about the quantity of flour. Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for such a large family. It would have been a flat heresy to do so. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. At last, the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared. The hearth was swept. The fire was made up. The compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect. Apples and oranges were put upon the table and a shovel full of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew around the hearth in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, meaning a half a one. And at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass. 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. However, these held the hot stuff from the jug as well as golden goblets would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and cracked noisily. Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us." Tiny Tim chimed in, "God bless us, everyone." Tim sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his. "Spirit, tell me if Tiny Tim will live." "I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die. None other of my race will find him here. What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population." Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the Spirit. "Man, if man you be in heart, forbear that wicked cant until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live, what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven, you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child." Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and, trembling, cast his eye upon the ground. But he raised them speedily on, hearing his own name. Bob Cratchit raises a toast. "Mr. Scrooge, I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." Mrs. Cratchit replied disdainfully, "The founder of the feast, indeed. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I'd hope he'd have a good appetite for it." "My dear, the children, it's Christmas Day." "It should be Christmas Day, I'm sure, on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow." "My dear, it's Christmas Day. I'll drink to his health for your sake and for the day's, not for his." "Long life to him. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt." The children drank the toast after her. It was the first of their proceedings which had no heartiness in it. Tiny Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care tuppence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the family, and this was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes. But after it had passed away, they were 10 times merrier than before, just from the mere relief of Scrooge the Baleful being done with. The chestnuts and the jug went round and by they had a song from Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice and sang it very well indeed. There was nothing of high mark in this. They were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And when they faded and looked happier yet in the bright sprinklings of the Spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim, until the last. By this time, it was getting dark and snowing pretty heavily. As Scrooge and the spirits went along the streets, the brightness of the roaring fires in kitchens, parlors, and all sorts of rooms was wonderful. Blessings over all. How the ghost exulted, how it bared its huge chest and opened its capacious palm and floated on. Such an outpouring from its generous hand was bestowed a bright mirth on everything within its reach. Again, the ghost sped on. It was a great surprise to Scrooge to hear a hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find his own self in a bright, dry, gleaming room with a spirit standing and smiling by his side, looking at that same nephew with approving affability. The nephew said, he said that Christmas was a humbug. As I live, he believed it too. Scrooge's niece replied, more shame for him, Fred. He's a comical old fellow, and that's the truth. My uncle is not so pleasant as I think he might be. However, his offenses carry their own punishment, and I'm sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffers by his ill whims? Himself, always. He takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come and dine with us. What's the consequence? Well, he loses some pleasant moments which could do him no harm. I'm sure he loses us as more pleasant companions than he can find all alone with no company but his own thoughts, being either in his mouldy old office or his dusty old chambers. I mean to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not. And I think I shook him yesterday. It was the company's turn to laugh now at the notion of his shaking Scrooge being thoroughly good-natured and not much caring what they laughed at. He encouraged them in their merriment. But the scene passed. Scrooge and the spirit were again upon their travels. Come back, bud. Come back. Much they saw, and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirit stood beside sick beds, and they felt cheerful. Beside visitors on foreign lands, and they felt close to home. Beside struggling men, and they felt patient in their greater hope. By poverty, and they felt rich. In an almshouse, hospital, in jail, in misery's every refuge, where vain man in his little brief authority had not made fast the door to bar the spirit out, the spirit left his blessing and taught Scrooge his precepts. It was a long night, if it were only a night, but Scrooge had his doubts of this because the Christmas holidays appeared to be condensed into that space of time that they passed together. It was strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his own outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. Scrooge had observed this change, but never spoke of it until they left a children's party, and looking at the spirit as they stood together in an open place, Scrooge noticed that its hair was gray.
Are spirits' lives so short?
My life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight at midnight. Hark! The time is drawing near. The chimes were ringing 11:15 at that moment.
Spirit, forgive me if I'm not justified in what I ask, but I see something strange and not belonging to yourself protruding from your skirts. Is it a foot or a claw?
It might be a claw, for so little flesh there is upon it. Look here. From the foldings of its robe, it brought 2 children, wretched, abject, fearful, hideous, miserable. They knelt down at the spirit's feet and clung upon the outside of its garment. Oh man, look here. Look. They were a boy and a girl, meager, ragged, scowling, but also with humility. Where graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with its freshest tints, a hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacing. No change, no degradation, no preservation of humanity in any grade through all the mysteries of wonderful creation has monsters half so horrible and dread. Scrooge started back, appalled.
Spirit, are they yours?
They are mankind's, and they cling to me. This boy is ignorance. This girl is want. Beware of them both, and all of their degree, but most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased. Deny it, or make it worse. Then bide the end.
Have they no refuge or resource?
Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, he beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground toward him. Slowly, gravely, silently, the very air through which this spirit moved seemed to scatter gloom and misery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. But for this, it would have been difficult to see its figure in the night and darkness by which it was surrounded. Its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread.
I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come?
The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand.
You are about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us. Is that so, Spirit?
The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in its folds, as if the spirit had inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. But Scrooge was all the worse for this. It filled him with a vague, uncertain horror to know that behind the dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes intently fixed upon him.
Lead on. Lead on. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, Spirit.
They scarcely seemed to enter the city, but there they were, in the heart of it, amongst the merchants who hurried up and down and chinked the money in their pockets and conversed in groups and looked at their watches, as Scrooge had seen them do often. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk.
No, I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead.
Ah, well, right then. When did he die?
Last night, I believe.
What was the matter with him? I thought he'd never die.
God knows.
And what's he done with his money?
I haven't heard. Left it to his company, perhaps? He hasn't left it to me. That's all I know.
Right, it's likely to be a cheap funeral, for upon my life, I don't know of anybody to go to it. Suppose we make up a party and volunteer to go. Well, I don't mind going if a lunch is provided, but I must be fed if I go. So, cheerio and goodbye.
Right then. Goodbye.
Speakers and listeners strolled away and mixed with other groups. Scrooge knew the men and looked toward the spirit for an explanation, but the phantom pointed to two persons meeting.
How are you?
How are you?
Well, old Scratchy's got his own at last, eh?
So I'm told.
Gold, didn't it? Seasonable for Christmas time. Well,
Good morning.
good morning.
Not another word. That was their meeting, their conversation, and their parting. Scrooge was at first inclined to be surprised that the spirit should attach importance to conversations apparently so trivial. He looked about that in every place for his own image, but another man stood in his accustomed corner. And though the clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, he saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes that poured in through the portico. But now they left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of the town where Scrooge had never penetrated before. Although he recognized its situation and its bad repute. The ways were foul and narrow, the shop and houses wretched, the people half naked, drunken, slipshod, ugly. Alleys and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged their offenses of smell and dirt upon the straggling streets, and the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth, and with misery. Deep in this den of infamy, there was a low-browed shop where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought. Within the shop, upon the floor, were piled up heaps of rusty keys, nails, chains, hinges, files, scales, weights, and iron of all kinds. There, sitting in, among the wares he dealt in, by a charcoal stove made of old bricks, was a gray-haired rascal, nearly 70 years of age, who smoked his pipe in all the luxury of calm retirement. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man, just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black, who was no less startled by the sight of them than they had been upon the recognition of each other. They decided an order as the first worker woman chimed in.
Right. Let the charwoman be the first. Let the laundress be the second. And let the undertaker's man, right, let him be the third. Look here, old Joe, here's a chance. If we haven't all three met here without meaning it, I don't know what's a coincidence.
Old Joe replied, "You couldn't have met in a better place. Come into the parlor." The woman, who had already spoken, threw her bundle on the floor and sat down in a flaunting manner on a stool, crossing her elbows on her knees, looking at the other two.
What odds, then? What odds, Mr. Dilber? Every single person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did. Scrooge, you bastard. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I suppose. If he wanted to keep them after he was dead, wicked old screw, why wasn't he more natural in his lifetime, eh? I mean, if he had been, he'd have somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping at his last there alone by himself. Miserable old chump. Upon that old bundle, old Joe. Open it. Go ahead. Let me know the value you think it's worth.
But the man in faded black, mounting the breach first, produced his plunder. It was not extensive. A seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value were all. They were severally examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked the sums for each upon the wall and added them up into a total. Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, a little wearing apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of silver tongs, and a few boots. Old Joe admitted, "I always give too much to the ladies. It's a weakness of mine." Next was the woman with the bundle on the floor. Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening it, and, having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large, heavy roll of some dark stuff. Old Joe inquired, "What do you call this, then?"
"It's this bed curtains." "You don't mean to say you took 'em down, rings and all, with him lying there? Who's worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man, I dare say."
Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. As they sat grouped about their spoil, in the scanty light afforded by the old man's lamp, he viewed them with a detestation and disgust which could hardly have been greater if they had been obscene demons marketing the corpse itself. The scene changed. Scrooge recoiled in terror. He almost touched a bed, a bare, uncurtained bed, on which, beneath a ragged sheet, there lay a something covered up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself in an awful language. The room was very dark. Too dark to be observed with any accuracy, though Scrooge glanced around it in obedience to a secret impulse, anxious to know what kind of room it was. A pale light, rising in the outer air, fell straight upon the bed, and on it,
plundered and bereft, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of a man. Scrooge glanced toward the phantom. Its steady hand was pointed to the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted with the slightest raising of it. The motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part would have disclosed the face. The dead man lay in the dark and empty house. There was a sound of gnawing rats beneath the hearthstone. What they wanted in the room of death, and why they were so restless and disturbed, Scrooge did not dare to think. "Spirit, I understand you, and I would do it if I could." Still, the ghost pointed with an unmoved finger to the head. "Spirit, I have not the power. If there is any person in the town who feels emotion caused by this man's death, show that to me. Show that person to me, Spirit, I beseech you." The phantom spread its dark robe before him for a moment like a wing, and, withdrawing it, revealed a room by daylight where a mother and her children were. She was expecting someone, and with anxious eagerness. At length, the long-expected knock was heard. She hurried to the door and met her husband, a man whose face was careworn and depressed, though he was young. There was a remarkable expression in it now, a kind of serious delight of which he felt ashamed and which he struggled to repress. The wife asked him, "Is it good or is it bad?" "It's bad." "We're quite ruined then?" "No. There is hope yet, Caroline." "If he relents, there is. Nothing is past hope if such a miracle has happened." "He's past relenting, Caroline. He's dead." She was a mild and patient creature. If her face spoke truth, but she was thankful in her soul to hear that he was dead. And she said so with clasped hands. She prayed forgiveness in the very next moment and was sorry, but the first was the emotion of her heart. "By the time our debt is transferred, we shall be ready with money. We shall sleep with light hearts tonight." "Spirit, let me see some tenderness connected with a death, or that dark chamber which we left just now will be forever present to me." The ghost conducted him through several streets familiar to his feet, and they entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, and found the mother and the children seated round the fire. Quiet, very quiet. The formerly noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in sewing, but they were all very quiet. Mrs. Cratchit laid her work upon the table and put her hand up to her face. "The colour hurts my eyes." "Aye, no. All right. They're better now. I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It must be near his time." Peter added in consolation to his mother, "Past it, rather, but I think he's walked a little slower these last few evenings, Mother." Mrs. Cratchit said, I have known him to walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed. It was very light to carry. It was no trouble indeed. Ah, is your father at the door? His tea was ready for him on the hob. Then the two young Cratchits got upon his lap, and each child laid a little cheek against his face. Bob was very cheerful with them and spoke pleasantly to all the family. You went today, then, Robert? Yes, my dear. I wish you could have gone. It will have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him that we would walk there on a Sunday. My child, little child, my little child. Bob told the family of the extraordinary kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, whom he had scarcely seen but once, and who, meeting him in the street that day and seeing that he looked a little down, inquired what had happened to distress him. Scrooge's nephew said, I am heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit, and heartily sorry for your good wife. If I can be of service to you in any way, pray, come to me. It really seemed as if he'd known our Tiny Tim and felt with us. My dears, when we recollect how patient and how mild Tiny Tim was, we shall not quarrel easily amongst ourselves, nor shall we forget our Tiny Tim in doing it. Scrooge said, Spectre, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I don't know how. Tell me, what man was that whom we saw lying dead? The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him as before until they reached an iron gate, a churchyard. Here, the wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay underneath the ground. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. Scrooge advanced toward it, trembling. The phantom was exactly as it had been, but Scrooge dreaded that he saw a new meaning in its solemn shape. Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be? Or are they the shadows of the things that may be only? Still, the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood. Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends to which, if persevered in, they must lead. But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it as thus, with what you show me. The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge crept toward the grave, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. Am I the man who lay upon the bed? No, spirit, oh no! The finger pointed from the grave to him and back again. Oh no, spirit, no! No, no, no. I am not the man I was. Why show me this if I am all past hope? Show me that I may yet change these shadows of you as you have shown me by an altered life. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I shall not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me that I may wash away the writing on this stone.
And there began an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and it dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes. And the bedpost, it was his own. And the room, it was his own. The bed curtains were not torn down. They're not torn down. Rings and all, they are here. I am here. The shadows of things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be. I know they will be. He was crying and laughing in the same breath. I am as light as a feather. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody. A Happy New Year to all the world. That's it. Really, for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh. A most illustrious laugh. The father of a long, long line of brilliant laughs. I don't know what day of the month it is. I don't know how long I've been amongst the spirits. I don't know anything. He was checked in his transports by the churches ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist. Clear, bright, jovial, stirring, cold piping for the blood to dance to. Golden sunlight, heavenly sky. Sweet, sweet, fresh air. Merry bells, oh glorious, glorious. Scrooge called downward to a boy in Sunday clothes. What's today, my fine fellow? Why, it's Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything they like. Of course they can. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow. Hello? Do you know the poulterers in the street? But the next one? I should hope I do. An intelligent boy, a remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? The big one. What, the one as big as me? What a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, it's hanging there now. Is it? Go and buy it. And tell him to bring it here, that I may give them the directions as to where to take it. Come back with the man, come back with the butcher, and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes, and I'll give you half a crown. The boy was off like a shot. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's. He shan't know who sends it. Scrooge went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man, and he stood there, waiting for his arrival. The door knocker caught his eye. I shall love it as long as I live. I scarcely ever looked at it before. What an honest expression it has in its face. It's a wonderful knocker. Oh, here's the turkey. Hello, how are you? Merry Christmas. Why, it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town. You must have a cab. The chuckle with which he said this, the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again and chuckled till he cried. He dressed himself in all his best and at last got out into the streets. The people by this time were pouring forth as he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present, and walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded
every one with a delighted smile. He looked so irresistibly present that 3 or 4 good-humored fellows said, "Good morning, sir. Merry Christmas to you." He had not gone far when, coming on toward him, he beheld the portly gentleman who had walked into his counting house the day before, and it sent a pang across his heart to think how this old gentleman would look upon him when they met. Scrooge quickened his pace and took the old gentleman by both hands. "My dear sir, how do you do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. It was very kind of you. A Merry Christmas to you, sir."
Mr. Scrooge?
Yes, that is my name. I fear it might not be a pleasant one to you. Allow me to ask your pardon. And will you have the goodness?
Here, Scrooge whispered in his ear.
Lord bless me, my dear Mr. Scrooge. Are you serious? If you please, not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in it, I assure you. Will you do me that favor?
My dear sir, I don't know what to say to such a munificent...
Don't say anything. Please, come and see me. Will you come and see me?
I will.
Thank you. I am much obliged to you. Thank you 50 times. Bless you, sir.
Then he turned his steps toward his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock. But finally, he made a dash and did it. A housemaid answered the door. "Is your master at home, my dear?"
Yes, sir.
"Where is he, my love?"
He's in the dining room, sir, along with mistress. I'll show you upstairs, if you please.
Thank you. He knows me. I'll go in here, my dear. Scrooge's nephew, Fred, stood up immediately to greet him. "Why, bless my soul, who's that?"
It is I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner.
"Will you let me in, Fred?" It is a mercy Fred didn't shake his arm off. Scrooge was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful togetherness, wonderful happiness. However, he was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming in late. That was the thing he had set his heart upon. And yes, he did it. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9 a.m. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob. He was a full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat there with his door wide open that he might see him come into the room. Bob's hat was off before he opened the door. His comforter, too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. Scrooge, in his accustomed growly voice, "Hello?
What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?"
I'm very sorry, sir. I am behind my time,"
Bob Cratchit stuttered.
You are. Yes, I think you are. Step this way, sir, if you please.
"It's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir."
Now, I'll tell you what, my friend. I'm not going to stand this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, And therefore, I am about to raise your salary.
Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding him, and calling to the people in the court for help, and the doctors with a straitcoat.
A Merry Christmas, Bob. A merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl, Bob. Make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit.
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, and little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good at which some people did not have their fill at laughter in the outset. His own heart laughed, and that was quite good enough for him. Therefore, it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well. If any man alive possessed the knowledge, it was Ebenezer Scrooge. May that be truly said of all of us. All of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us. Everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We will see you Thursday for the Christmas Eve Lovecast. That will happen at 7:30 this week. Just the way that we did at Thanksgiving. As always, I leave you with a warm heart and a warm fire to bid each other adieu in the chat. Thank you very much. Merry Christmas. I love you all. See you Thursday.